In the depths of the Congo, something is waking up, not a war, not a protest, but a battery revolution so powerful it is pulling entire nations into a new global alliance. With Burkina Faso and India at its side, the world is about to feel the shock.
At dawn in the heart of Central Africa, the Congo River carried a silver mist that moved like a quiet promise across the water. Villages stood along its banks, old wooden boats rocking gently as fishermen prepared their nets. But under the soil and stone far below, the ground held a power that the world had just begun to understand. For many generations, the Democratic Republic of Congo was known as a place of untold wealth and unfinished dreams, its lands rich with copper, cobalt, and rare earths, yet its people left in the shadow of distant boardrooms and foreign ships. This story begins in that shadow, just as it started to disappear. In the city of Lubumbashi, where red dust clung to shoes and the sun painted the rooftops in warm gold, a young engineer named Mabiala watched a strange new factory rise out of what used to be an abandoned colonial warehouse. The building had no flags of foreign companies, no foreign guards. Its signs were written in Lingala, French, and local scripts, and it was owned by a cooperative of Congolese miners, scientists, and traders. Word traveled quickly. This place would not ship raw cobalt away, it would transform it. Batteries made in Congo would power cars, homes, drones, and satellites across the world. For the first time, the story of Congo would not be told as a supplier of pain, but as a maker of power. The announcement shook financial centers far away. News traveled across oceans to Asia, the Middle East, the Americas, and Europe. Traders whispered that something had changed. Analysts argued that the balance of the future energy economy might be moving south, away from long-standing industrial powers. But in African markets, the response was different. From Dakar to Nairobi, from Addis Ababa to Ouagadougou, people spoke about dignity and destiny. One country, in particular, listened very closely: Burkina Faso. Burkina Faso had spent years redefining itself, pushing back against old systems that had kept it dependent and divided. Its people had turned toward a vision of collective strength, inspired by old dreams of Pan-African unity that once echoed through the speeches of leaders and the songs of revolutionaries. When reports of Congo's new battery plants reached Ouagadougou, leaders did not see only business. They saw partnership, strategy, and survival. Their land did not hold oceans of cobalt, but it held something else: determination, agricultural strength, and a population ready to protect African resources rather than export them raw. At the same time, far to the east, India watched carefully. India had once been a colony, its people taught to believe that its future must be decided in foreign capitals. But decades of rebuilding had given it a strong internal will, a vast technical workforce, and a vision for clean energy that stretched from crowded cities to silent deserts filled with solar panels. India understood minerals, manufacturing, and the long memory of exploitation. When it saw what Congo was attempting, Indian planners did not think of ownership. They thought of alliance. The first meeting happened in a place that surprised everyone: a simple conference hall in Addis Ababa, chosen because it symbolized African unity rather than corporate power. Delegates from Congo, Burkina Faso, and India arrived without heavy entourages. There were no cameras, no grand announcements, and no foreign lobbyists. Just people who believed that history could be redirected by choices made in ordinary rooms. Mabiala, now representing a new Congolese research council, spoke quietly. He explained that for the first time, Congo was refining and assembling batteries within its own borders. The workers were paid fairly. The technology was shared within the country. Schools had been built next to factories. "We are no longer asking the world what we are worth," he said. "We are telling the world what we are capable of." Burkina Faso's representative, a former teacher from Bobo Dioulasso, replied that political courage meant little without economic independence. He described plans for transport corridors protected by African security agreements, allowing raw and processed materials to move between African countries without being trapped in foreign-controlled routes. "We will not be the road others walk on," he said. "We will choose where our roads go." India's delegate, an industrial scientist who had grown up in a crowded Mumbai neighborhood, listened more than he spoke. When he did speak, he said that India did not want to repeat the old world's mistakes, where collaboration was a disguise for control. He proposed an idea that sounded simple but carried deep meaning: joint ownership of technology, cross-training of engineers, and a promise that no single nation would be more important than the other. It was not a treaty of flags. It was an agreement of trust. From that quiet meeting grew the first true alliance of the new energy age. In Congo, battery plants expanded not as isolated industrial zones, but as community centers. Families lived close enough to walk to work. Children watched their parents build the tools of the future instead of digging for fragments of wealth to send away. The batteries were stamped not just with serial numbers, but with symbols of African unity and partnership. Burkina Faso became the logistical heart of the project. Its landlocked position, once seen as a disadvantage, turned into a strategic strength. Rail lines and roads stretched across its territory, built by African labor and designed by shared African and Indian teams. These corridors moved not only batteries and components, but ideas and people. Farmers learned to use affordable energy storage for irrigation. Clinics stored vaccines without fear of power cuts. Small workshops ran machines powered by Congolese batteries and maintained by engineers trained with Indian methodologies. India, in turn, transformed parts of its crowded industrial zones into shared research hubs. African and Indian students sat side by side, not as charity cases or guests, but as equal partners. They worked on improving battery life, recycling methods, and new mineral combinations that would reduce environmental harm. The laboratories were quiet except for the hum of machines and the soft sound of collaboration, a rhythm older than any empire and stronger than any corporate war. The world began to feel the tremor. Countries that had controlled global energy narratives for decades started issuing reports filled with concern, not because a peaceful revolution had occurred, but because it had occurred without them at the center. Trade routes shifted. Shipping lanes grew quieter, while overland African corridors buzzed with activity. Financial markets began pricing in something they could not easily measure: the political will of nations that had decided to write their own future. Maybe Allah one evening stood atop a hill overlooking a glowing industrial complex that had replaced a field of rusted machines left by a long-forgotten foreign operator. He thought about his grandparents, who had believed that Congo's wealth was a curse because it attracted exploitation. Now, trucks powered by Congolese batteries moved silently across the complex, lights powered by stored African sunlight. He realized that wealth had never been the curse. Loss of control had been. In Ouagadougou, children learned in school not only about European and Asian histories, but about the great councils of Africa, the philosophies of unity, and the idea that borders were scars of old conflicts, not permanent truths. They studied how Burkina Faso had chosen partnership over isolation and how it had protected its role in the new global energy chain without losing its soul. In India, villages that once waited days for stable electricity now had local storage units built from Congolese Burkinabe Indian designs. Farmers charged tools by day and lit their homes by night. People began to talk not about development as charity, but as cooperation among equals. Not everyone celebrated. Old companies tried to spread doubt. They funded reports warning that such alliances were unsafe, unrealistic, or politically unstable. They spoke of risk, while they themselves were built on centuries of risk imposed on others. But the factories kept running. The roads kept extending. The research papers kept improving technology. Reality outpaced fear. A symbolic moment came when the first fully jointly produced battery pack was installed in a small hospital near the Niger River. The ceremony was not grand. There were no red carpets. Just nurses, engineers, farmers, and children. The power stayed on all night, keeping machines running that saved lives. That silent, steady light meant more than any speech. The story of this revolution did not travel through headlines alone. It moved through daily life. Women used electric grinders without listening to the cough of diesel engines. Students studied without candles. Water was pumped cleanly instead of carried for miles. Each small improvement was a political statement that dignity could be engineered. One year, the three nations met again in a different place, this time on Congolese soil, near a massive hydroelectric project that fed directly into the battery manufacturing zones. They looked at maps not drawn in colonial languages of extraction, but in new languages of connection. Lines showed knowledge exchange, cultural exchange, and mutual defense of resources. They were not drawing empires. They were drawing trust. Maybe Allah spoke again, but this time not as a dreamer, but as a witness. He spoke of how miners were now shareholders, how villages were now stakeholders, how the word export no longer meant loss, but sharing. He said that the world had asked if Congo's battery revolution could power the world, but the better question was whether the world was ready to be powered without chains. The Burkinabe representative spoke of cities that no longer feared energy blackouts. He spoke of young people who no longer wanted to flee their home because hope had arrived quietly, in the form of infrastructure, respect, and opportunity. He said that Pan-Africanism was no longer a slogan. It was becoming a system. The Indian scientist, now older but with the same calm eyes, said that true power was not measured in voltage, but in fairness. He said that a battery built on stolen hands would always carry instability, but a battery built on shared purpose could last longer than anyone predicted. Years passed. The alliance expanded, but carefully. They refused to grow too fast or too wide, knowing that stability was more important than headlines. When new countries showed interest, they were welcomed not with contracts, but with conversations. The revolution moved slowly, but it moved steadily. Children born after the first factory in Lubumbashi grew up thinking it was normal for Africa to invent, for Africa to lead, and for Africa to partner as an equal. That normality was the greatest victory of all. At the edge of the Congo River, where the mist still rolled gently at dawn, maybe Allah now walked with his own children. He told them stories not of suffering, but of turning points. He showed them the distant hum of factories and the quiet glide of solar-powered boats. He explained that power did not come only from minerals or machines or money. It came from the decision to stand together. In Burkina Faso, farmers looked across fields irrigated by quietly stored energy and felt no fear when clouds hid the sun. They knew that the power of their work was protected and shared. In India, students wrote essays not about escaping the past, but about building networks of solidarity that spanned oceans and deserts. The world adjusted, slowly and reluctantly, to a reality where the center of gravity had shifted. News panels debated it. Economists tried to model it. Politicians tried to control it. But none of them could fully capture the truth, that a quiet, determined alliance had changed the rules without firing a single shot. And so the question, powering the world, no longer sounded like a challenge. It sounded like a possibility guided by ethics. The Congo no longer stood as a symbol of extraction. Burkina Faso no longer stood as a forgotten crossroads. India no longer stood as a distant giant. Together, they stood as proof that history could be rewritten by cooperation, and that energy could be clean not only in chemistry, but in conscience. The batteries spread across continents, but their true charge had already done its work. It had lit a path that could not be unlit. It had shown that Pan-Africanism, when joined with honest partnership, was not a dream buried in old speeches. It was a living system, humming softly, steady and strong, like a heartbeat beneath the future. And in the quiet mornings, as rivers flowed and factories breathed and children learned, the world began to run not on fear of running out, but on the confidence of shared power.